What's up, everybody? We are here for episode 7 of Hanging with Daddy, and I can't tell you how excited I am for today's guest. So what I'm going to do is really just fire right through. We're going to get to that unbelievable intro from Gabe, Bob, and Steven, and then I'm going to do the intro for our guest. So sit back for a minute, listen to a banger. We're about to get started.
Get down. Turn on the pod cause we looking at live right now. Peeling it back, take a quick look inside up. All of these analysts, daddy gon' handle this. Know he's a baddie, I know he ain't bad at this. We gon' lay back, talking irrelevance. Why do all that? Just for the hell of it. Hanging with daddy. What's the vibe though? Late night vibes. Oh. Hanging with daddy. What's up, Mike? Turn it on right now. I got the remote now. Hanging with daddy. Let's go. Late night vibes. And we're hanging with daddy. Turn up. Turn it on right now. Daddy got control now.
Never gets old. It really never gets old. I love that intro. So today, I am so excited to introduce a guest. And normally I do a basic intro. I give you the rundown, but I want to tell you a story for this particular intro for this guest. So this guest put out a tweet and they said they were looking to join some podcasts. And I couldn't have been more excited because having followed this man, what I knew about him was Dynasty football, beer, and barbecue, 3 of my favorite things. So I said, absolutely, I would love the opportunity to have you on the show. What I didn't know and what I've come to find out is the more I mentioned that I was having this person on the show, what everybody brought up is what an amazing human being he is. Everyone talking about what a great guest, great person. And what I can tell you is from my interactions with them so far, that has been nothing short of the truth. Just a wonderful analyst and a wonderful person, someone I'm honestly honored to have on Hanging with Daddy. So without further ado, let me bring out the senior fantasy sports writer for CBS Sports and an analyst on the show everybody has loved for years, Fantasy Football Today, Mr. Heath Cummings. Heath, welcome to the show, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And that was far too kind of an introduction. I do appreciate it. I'm looking forward to seeing what pops up in the next half hour to an hour.
Oh, we're going to have some fun with it. I know this is usually a late night show and we're doing it mid-afternoon, but obviously it doesn't stop us for enjoying ourselves a little drink. Cheers, my friend. But honestly, I can't tell you how excited I am for this show. I've been looking forward to it for a while. So thank you so much for taking the time. So I wanted to start with a little bit of football because I do feel like, it's a football label, even though, I talk about random stuff. And in particular, you and I have been doing a bunch of mock drafts, yourself with CBS and me with DLF. And honestly, we did one together just about a week and a half ago now. And what I wanted to ask you was in particular, we draft drastically differently. I'm noticing you going a lot earlier on running back. I tend to load up wide receiver. Are there certain players in these mock drafts that you find just always end up on your roster? You know how you want to diversify, but you kind of get 2 or 3 guys that always just seem to fall to you at a value? Like, who are the guys you think you've seen kind of multiple copies of so far?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird for me, and I wrote about this in the most recent mock draft. We just did a super flex mock, and I like to try different things in mock drafts. That's kind of what I think they're for. Like, let's see what happens if I do this early. Let's see what happens if I do this early. I will say that, like, the 2 guys I took first in our draft, DeAndre Swift in round 1, J.K. Dobbins in round 2, are absolutely guys that often show up at the top of my draft board as like, okay, this guy should be drafted next. Now, I don't always go by that. In our most recent Superflex draft, I thought, I wonder what happens if I don't take a quarterback with my first 6 picks in a Superflex Dynasty draft. And so I did that. I took 3 running backs. I took 3 wide receivers, didn't take a quarterback until round 7. My quarterbacks were terrible. Shocking. Mm-hmm. That's what happened. But no, I like Swift and Dobbins at the running back position are 2 guys. I also seem, and this was the case last year as well, but I definitely still have Devontae Adams higher than most people do. I think the last time I updated my rankings, I had him at number 3. He might be number 4 next time, but he's going to be a top 3 or 4 dynasty wide receiver for me, despite his age, just because I think he's staying in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers. And I think you've got one of the top 2 or 3 wide receivers in fantasy football for the next 2 or 3 years. So those are probably the 3 that are the most common. Another thing, and I've got to figure this out, is I can't get Kyle Pitts high enough. That might be because I draft with John Bosch too often. But I'm never, ever getting Kyle Pitts, and I don't like that. I want him.
So I was shocked at what happened at 103 in your Superflex draft. Like I opened it and I was like, how did this happen?
Well,
Because
then you saw who was in the draft and you understood it.
everybody knows if John's in, Kyle Pitts is going way before you're comfortable. I do love the Adams call out. He's actually my dynasty wide receiver 3 right now. The two I tend to flip flop are him and Tyreek Hill, kind of both in the same category of, what do we have for longevity? What do we have for output? But I love Devontae Adams, and I think I've been getting him pretty much everywhere because the discount we're getting, the uncertainty, and same thing we got with Rodgers last year when people were nervous and he was falling to the second round of Superflex redrafts. I was like, this is insane. For me, the two guys are very obvious why. It's Chris Godwin and Calvin Ridley. I tend to play to win, so I tend to buy risk, and I think a knee injury is very minimal risk. Calvin Ridley's totally uncharted territory. I have no idea what's going to happen. But in the 5th round, you don't have talent like that. So I'd rather, take the risk on a guy who hopefully by basically facing what he was going through can get better and get back on the field, because then you're getting a second round deal in the 4th and 5th I'm finding right now.
And I think that's the right way to look at it. Listen, none of us have any inkling of a guess, or if you do, then you should be profiting on it, I guess. But any inkling of a guess of when Calvin Ridley is going to play football again, or who he's going to play for, or what exactly is going on. So you just have to look at it as like, if I look at this as a situation where I know the upside is a top 5 wide receiver, and I know the downside is him not playing football again, at what point am I willing to accept that risk? 5th round seems perfectly reasonable to me. 4th, maybe. 3rd's too early. But yeah, 5th round, I think that's probably worth it.
And that's why we all have those like mid-round picks where you just swing and miss on one, and you can do that and still pick things up. You're right. 1st, 2nd, even 3rd round, a complete whiff, you're playing from behind the 8 ball. But I think you're right. I mean, to me, 4th and 5th is where I'm comfortable. And honestly, it seems to where he's going.
Yeah, I think the more difficult question is, if you're a team that had Calvin Ridley on your team, then you probably have quite a bit invested in him. If you are a contender, then what price are you willing to give Calvin Ridley up? Or are you just holding and hoping that he helps you contend this year? Or on the flip side, if you're a rebuilder, are you just holding and hoping that eventually his value bounces back? I think it's more difficult discussing Ridley in terms of trade conversation than it is in maybe draft.
I agree. And I feel like I've been on the higher side of things just because I don't see a talent level like we've seen in previous years in this particular draft class. So for me personally, I have him right around 103 in value, 104. I'm seeing people that are arguing that he's more like 109, but once we get past really the top 7 players for me in this year's draft class, it's all a crapshoot. And when we're talking February, where we don't even know where they're going to land, it's an even bigger crapshoot, right? So I tend to, and I guess this has always been my style of play, give me someone who I've shown can prove it in the NFL. That's always the biggest question mark. I mean, how many burnouts do we have? How many people were so high on N'Keal Harry? Crushes me as a Patriots fan, that as an industry, we were all super high on, like, this is a can't miss guy who obviously completely missed. Not to date myself, but, early on, JJ Stokes was a guy who I went all in on when he got to San Francisco as the next Jerry Rice. And I think ever since then, I've always figured that proving yourself in the league is more valuable than possibly any other question mark than I put into any model that I'm looking at.
Absolutely. And I think you bring up an interesting point with the draft class, because it kind of seems like the closer we get to the draft, the less people are interested. I think, and I'm betting on this, I could be wrong, I think that's going to change most likely. I think that, when we get into late March, early April, we're going to be excited about 4 or 5 guys. And then when the draft happens, there are going to be a few guys that get boosted up because of draft position. I think eventually we'll get to a point to where we feel good about the top 8 to 10 players. Now, who knows if they will actually be good, or if we'll be right about the right 8 to 10 players. But I do kind of feel like the lack of excitement over this year's draft picks might be a profit opportunity right now. Because I just don't really believe that we know that well right now. And so if everybody's negative on it, I'm probably buying.
I love that. And I looked at your dynasty trade chart, and I noticed some of the guys that you were using as your benchmarks. I believe it was like Pitts was number 1. And I remember it was Amon-Ra St. Brown that you brought up as like that mid-round value, later first value. And it's funny because you picked a player who has a lot of question marks around him and then matched him with an asset that has a ton of question marks. So talk about that. Like, that's really analogous to me when I look at that match, and I loved the way that you did that, but I was just curious on kind of, how, when you do these rankings and these charts, and then eventually your projections as well, how you weigh these question marks. It seems to be you get to that point where there's a million of them surrounding multiple assets.
Yeah, I think like the thing I try to do is match up what is the player I would be willing to accept for this versus what is the player I would be willing to try to acquire for this, and then get somewhere in the middle of that. I mean, that's not by any means a perfect science, but it's my trade chart, so I guess it should be my opinion. I think it gets easier the closer we get. I usually add draft picks at the beginning of the prior season, and I'll just put 2022 first.
Mhm.
Because at that point, we don't know when you're trading for a first round pick. If you can guess if it's going to be early or late, but you have no idea if it's going to be top 3, top 5, 10th, 12th, something like that. So I just kind of go with, this is what a first round pick is going to be. And I try to get close to 6th or 7th and tell people, if you think it's an early pick, pay more than this. It will get much easier in about a month. And I'll break it down by 101, 102, 103, all the way through. But it's because I will have 12 players that I think are going to slot into those spots, and then I'll have a guess as what that value is. Right now, I've got it first 3 picks of the first round, picks 4 through 6. Well, it could be that by the time I get to the point where I'm guessing which players it's going to be, or projecting which players it's going to be, that I think that there's actually a big drop off after pick 8 and not after pick 6. And so then that value will change a little bit. The more information we get, the easier it gets. And I think right now the only play is to hedge off the direction everyone else is moving, because I don't think we have enough information.
I love that. And it's funny because one of the things that when I look at your work in particular, and then I work with like Leo Siga, who I talk to a lot about league mate tendencies, I always look for how I can overlay my draft order into your draft, into your charts, right? Because I know my league mates, and at least the league that I play in, I've been in it for 20 years. Wide receivers are going to fall, and they're who I love. So when I see you're looking at a value of 106, I'm like, well, sure, but in my league, that's 110. Like, this is great. So it makes so that I'm hoping that they're reading your stuff and not realizing their own tendencies, and that's where I'm getting a lot of value, because I'm like, well, the guy that I have in that pick, I can get for a little lower on your chart. So I socialize your stuff because I love it, but also because I can manipulate it in my own way. So it serves a dual purpose. Excuse me.
100%. That's exactly how everyone should be using it.
I love it. So I know that, and we'll get to my favorite part of the show in a minute, but we were talking before the show about your getting into your projections, which is more work than I could ever put in. So I appreciate you doing it for us. The one thing I always ask people when they're doing projections is, obviously you go in with a certain bias. You have some things in your head. As you're doing your projections, have there been players that have surprised you in either direction as you're going through it, that have either jumped up more than you would have expected them to, or fallen more than you expected to, because the numbers are showing a little different than what your thought process was?
That happens a lot. And what the clearest way to find it is, I always do like my projections for the coming year are factored into my dynasty rankings. It's like, it's some opinion, it's some formula, it's some upside, it's a bunch of different things, but projections are definitely a part of it. Well, I always update dynasty rankings right after the season. So I did a dynasty rankings update in January, every position, top 150, trade chart, everything, but I didn't have projections for 2022 yet. And so I just kind of go through and put an estimate of what I think I'm probably going to project these guys at, and that factors in. And then I do the projections in February, which I'm just finishing up that process. And there are always guys that are major differences from what I thought I was going to project to what they ended up. And one of those instances, and it doesn't matter because they're both top 5 wide receivers and they're number 1 and number 2 in Dynasty, but it was Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. Because I was like, in my head and my perception, Jamar Chase was better than Justin Jefferson when they were together at LSU. Jamar Chase was better as a rookie than Justin Jefferson was. Jamar Chase is number 1, Justin Jefferson's number 2. They're both awesome. I don't need to disparage either of them to make that point. then I get to my 22 projections, and I project a significantly higher pass rate for the Vikings than I do the Bengals. And Justin Jefferson has significantly less target competition than Jamar Chase does. And all of a sudden, I have Justin Jefferson projected for 50 more fantasy points next year than Jamar Chase. Now, it's number 3 and number 5, so it's a tier drop, but it's not a big difference in the rankings. But I've got a feeling when I update my Dynasty rankings next week, that might be enough to where it flips and says, you should actually have Jefferson ahead of Chase in terms of 1 versus 2, because I do think that if there's anything that not all Dynasty players, I would say experienced Dynasty people that are really in it, if there's anything they underrate, it's the year that we're currently in. Because experienced Dynasty players are all about the future, and I want my assets to increase in value next year, and all that stuff makes sense. Smart people came up with that. But I do think it's led those people to maybe underestimate this year a little bit. And so I probably overestimate that a little more in comparison to the field. So yes, Jefferson versus Chase is a good example of my perception versus what the projections spit out.
So that's funny. When we did the mock draft and I had the number 1 pick in our 1 quarterback mock draft, and of course I didn't look at your rankings till afterwards. I felt like that was cheating on the test a little bit. But when I looked, I'm like, oh no, I was like, I can't wait for the article to come out and hear that I screwed up the first pick. So I'm happy you're coming over to my side. And I had been Justin. And I think the reason why I was Jefferson is very similar to what you had outlined. I'm just such and have been huge T. Higgins fan, like a massive T. Higgins fan. And I think people are underestimating the 1 versus 1A thing as opposed to the Justin Jefferson 1 and Adam Thielen, obviously more of a red zone threat at this point and still a great player, but not quite for me at the level of Higgins in terms of talent. And then you even have Tyler Boyd mixed in as opposed to KJ Osborne. So that was very similar thought process that led us there. Yours probably far more mathematic and mine more finger in the air, but I do like to hear that. So basically now I want to get to what we were talking about earlier in my favorite part. I had stalked your Instagram, and my apologies. I had just been a lurker apparently and realized I hadn't hit the follow button until today. But I'm a huge fan of obviously what I'm seeing from you with barbecue and with beers. And we're talking about not having a lot of crossover. So what I wanted to hear from first, and then I have a question that hopefully is going to put you on the spot, but talk me through kind of what your type of beer is. We're obviously from different regions, but what are you looking for when you're picking out a beer? Like, is there a certain type? Is an IPA, you a stout guy, or is there certain factors you're looking for, different breweries? Like, take me through. Heath goes to the liquor store. What makes your final choice?
Yeah, I'm an almost an equal opportunity drinker. IPAs are definitely what I drink predominantly, but I enjoy a West Coast IPA just as much as a New England IPA. Now, I drink more of the hazies because that's what my wife also likes. She is not a big fan of the hop forward West Coast, but I like both of those. Love stouts, love porters. I will drink a sour in a sampler. Like if I go to a brewery and they've got a good sour, I'll drink that in the sampler. I'm not drinking a full can of a sour, but I like Belgians. The thing that I don't really drink are, I guess, the traditional beers. I don't really drink Pilsners or lagers or beers like that, but anything hoppy, anything hazy, no wheats. And I'm just a little bit, like I say, I don't eat gluten, but I drink lots of gluten in beer, obviously. But I don't drink white wheats, and I love the Stone Delicious, which is a gluten-free beer. Fantastic, much better for me in the morning. But yeah, it's really, I go and it kind of depends on what the plan is for the day, but I don't have a type, I guess. I have a couple types I don't drink.
I could dig it. And is there any beer, like, do you have any beer stories? Like, do you have anything where you went to a brewery, were blown away, or had an experience that kind of made the beer itself kind of have memories attached to it?
I can give you a story. You didn't put me on the spot. I had one ready.
No, I haven't put you on the spot yet. Wait, it's
okay. The story of how I started drinking craft beer, because I don't want to say 10 years ago because it was more than that. But more than 10 years ago, I was like a Miller High Life guy. Like, go buy a 30 pack of cans from the store. And that's just like when I was in college, I drank Milwaukee's Best. It was just cheap beer. And that was it. My son was my youngest, was born, and like at 6 to 8 months old, he started getting blisters and hives on his skin, and we didn't know why. And we went to all kinds of doctors and finally found out that he had mastocytosis, which is this really rare disease, and spent a lot of time and effort trying to figure that out and get him medicated to a point to where he was comfortable. And so I started doing a golf tournament every year to raise funds for the Mastocytosis Society in Kansas City when we lived there. And Boulevard Brewing was every year by far our biggest donor. They would give us $500 worth of beer to auction off, and they'd give us light up beer signs and all kinds of stuff. And so I started drinking Boulevard, the pale ale, the single wide IPA. And still, if I can find Boulevard down here, that's kind of my first choice, just because of how good they were as a local business supporting people that needed it.
That is amazing. I love that story. That is absolutely amazing. And I can't think of a better way to pick a beer. I don't have anything close to that. So now I don't think I can put you on the spot, though, because of what you brought up from college and earlier, which is we all put our cool beers on Instagram. Like I said, I put Heady Topper on there. Guilty pleasure beer, something that you're not going to tell your friends you're drinking, but you just find yourself gravitating towards. Is there one that you still held on to outside of the craft beer world?
No, the closest thing that I have to a guilty pleasure beer is going against something I said like 3 or 4 years ago. You know, Chris Towers, we sat right across from each other when I started at CBS, and we'd have a lot of conversations that were not fit for the podcasts, but he was telling me about session IPAs.
Mhm.
And I said a very dad thing. I said, I always feel like when I see the session IPAs, if I bought those, I'd be getting ripped off. I'm paying the same amount, but I'm getting like half the alcohol that I get in this 7 or 8% beer. Why would I do that? And now, because of how much I enjoy like smoking meats and stuff on the weekends, and because I'm 42 years old, I do find myself, if I'm going to be day drinking, seeking out the session beers. I'm not embarrassed about it, but me 5 years ago would have been embarrassed in my choices now. And I will say the founders, they've had the all day IPA for a long time. They've just come out with the all day haze. And that is by far my favorite day drinking beer right now.
Oh, I love it. I have had the all day. I haven't seen the haze yet. I'll have to pick that up. Now, I'll admit, because I don't want to just put you on the spot and leave anybody hanging. For whatever reason, and I can't figure it out, Modelo Amber tastes like vacation for me.
Okay.
So when I'm stressed out and I need to feel like I'm on vacation, I will pop a small 12-ounce can of Modelo and drink it in happiness and feel like I'm on vacation, even knowing that the beer snob in me is clearly has multiple different options in the fridge that are better, higher rated, probably more pure ingredients. But there's something about a Modelo Amber that puts me in a more relaxed state. And I can't tell if it's from the time I spent in the islands or whatever it is, but it calms me in a way that no other drink does. And it's not going to go on Instagram, but I can't help it when I'm in that mode to pop a Modelo and just kind of sit back and smile in New England winters, thinking I'm somewhere tropical and happy. So it's that's the one I always tend to go to.
I think if like that beer for me would probably be, and we called it Bud Heavy, but just regular old Budweiser, because when everybody else was drinking Coors Light and Miller Light, and I was saying they were drinking water, I always felt like the big man drinking just the Bud Heavy. I'm getting all the beer. And so if I go somewhere and they don't have craft beer and all they have are just the standard choices, that's Budweiser is what I'll order.
Now, is Bud Heavy? I'm wondering if that's like an age thing because that's exactly what I call it, being in my
Okay.
40s as well. So I'm not sure if that's still picked up, but yeah, we absolutely used to call it Bud Heavy and Bud Light. That was how you distinguished it, and you did feel different from the Bud Light guys. That you asked if they're watching their figure while you were drinking something that was clearly going to bloat you later. But
We were ridiculous and still are sometimes.
oh, absolutely, 100%. So a quick story for you. It's funny because up here, I was talking with my friend and he had talked to me about a brewery called Spencer Brewery, and I had never heard of it, never seen it. And he said, you have to check out the brewery. And I said, great, I'll go up there one time. He goes, no, Mike, you don't understand. Saturday. And I'm like, Saturday? I don't know what I have going on, dude. It is like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. It is a bunch of monks at a monastery who open their doors once a year.
Wow.
So I felt like I had to go because it just happened to be a conversation I was having 5 days earlier. So we pack up the car and we head out to Spencer Brewery in upstate Massachusetts. And there is like families there. They're doing a fireman cookout, and there are a bunch of monks making and serving beer. And they served one that is like nothing I've ever had before. It was an oatmeal stout, aged 13 years in a bourbon barrel.
Wow.
And I drank this and it like evaporated on my tongue. And I remember I said to him, I said, what is with this? He goes, oh, that's 14.5%. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I'm driving home, so that'll be enough for me today.
Right.
And they sent us this champagne bottles. They wouldn't serve it in regular bottles. They said that's probably more than you're ever going to want to drink. And it had this flavor like I've never tasted before. And it was a beer. It had hops in it and everything like that. And it was clearly a stout. You could tell by the consistency and by the color, but it almost had like a wine vibe to it, like with that dryness on your tongue that I'd never experienced from a beer. And I haven't been able to get back because of COVID. This was 2019 when I went, but I'm looking forward to when they Willy Wonka the doors again and let everybody in. But if you happen to be, and I'll DM you all the info, if you happen to be in Massachusetts and you can join me for Willy Wonka's beer factory, it's the wildest thing. I guess some German monks went to visit them for like 5 years, taught them how to make beer and live with them, and then just left. And they've been churning out stuff ever since. And what's in the store is fine. It's a standard IPA, like a Sam Adams level, I guess I'd say. But what they have hidden in their specialties is some outstanding flavors. It's absolutely amazing. So yeah, that's the one that I always kind of go to. I'm like, I don't know how I lucked into it, but here we are. All right, now we're both food guys. Obviously, you do a lot of smoking. And from what I read from I think it was Valentine's Day, that you're still using the old just wooden charcoal side smoker. You haven't gone to the electric yet?
I have not. I just like I love just sitting on the patio all day long and having to go do something hourly or every couple hours to make sure everything's right.
I love it. I love it. Now, what's the specialty? Is it a brisket? Is it a pulled pork? What's your, if you had to impress somebody, which one are you going with?
Like, it would depend on what my level of drinking for the day was going to be and what my, like, what would the risk was if something went wrong. Because I could just about do a good to great pulled pork in my sleep. And so that's the thing I go to the most often. That's this for the Super Bowl this year. I did 12 pounds of pulled pork and 12 pounds of chicken wings.
Love it.
That's probably what my most common. Burnt ends are the best, and that comes from the point of the brisket. And so I'll do a whole brisket and then chop the point off about 2 hours from the end, chop that up, put it into a pan with some special sauce and cook it on a little bit higher temperature for an hour. Burnt ends are the best thing that I've ever done, but not particularly consistent. And there's a very low downside to that and a brisket. I tell you, I did turkey one year for Thanksgiving, and I don't know that I'll ever cook a turkey in the oven again. That's worked out really well as well. But you know, I really enjoy it. I like just grilling as well, and that's the nice thing about the side box is you can do either one on the same grill. I did some steaks for Valentine's Day, but it's probably my favorite hobby.
Oh, I love it. Yeah, me and my dad have bonded over it. My dad, same as you, still has the side fire, and I'm a griller. So what we'll do is we'll set up right next to each other, have some drinks, and spend the day doing pounds of meat for family parties or whatever it
Right.
might be, and it's a blast. And that's what I love about this conversation is the two things I bonded with from my dad has been fantasy football and smoking and making food, and that's like it just makes me happy talking about these things.
For sure.
And speaking of which, as you know, I had to go to a family event that pushed us out a week, and the silver lining about what wasn't a great time was my dad was showing everybody that his son was on a CBS mock. He couldn't have been more proud. So thank you so much for that gift. He was there with his phone showing everyone, and it warmed my heart. It was probably the coolest thing that's ever happened. So thank you for that gift. I truly appreciate it.
That is outstanding, and thank you for telling me that story.
Oh, of course. Now I always ask people for my food and what I'm known for. I am, I guess, the now deemed the sandwich king of fantasy football. I do love sandwiches. It's my favorite. I just think, hey, anything I can carry and not use forks and knives for make me happy.
Right.
So what I always ask people is, and this is really for my own personal benefit, not for yours, so I apologize up front, is to tell me what your favorite sandwich is. Somewhere you got it. Is there a certain specialty that you've had? But I love hearing about the different varieties of sandwiches that people tend to go with. So Heath, tell me your favorite sandwich in as great of detail as you can.
I think that the best sandwich place in South Florida is probably La Spada's. And they do, and it's kind of like a sub shop, but better. And they do a roast beef that is just fantastic. Obviously, the roast is not brown; it's pink.
Mhm.
And you can choose your variety in terms of what you're going to put on it. But maybe the best sandwich I've had is a muffaletta a sandwich?
It is. I will
Okay.
allow that. Yes.
Okay, yes, actually in New Orleans,
Perfect.
and it was delicious. Again, I don't eat a lot of gluten, and so my sandwich consumption has dropped off in the last couple of years. But that is a sandwich that I will always remember.
I love it. I love it. Yeah, and I have found that my kids are gluten free, and I've been leaning that in different ways because of their diet. And yeah, the bread definitely hits different. You get used to it.
Yeah. Some of the ancient grains bread that is like, it's still kind of gluten free, but it's the old grains. That still tastes like a good wheat bread, and so you can make a good sandwich with that. You can make an excellent pulled pork sandwich with it.
Love it. Absolutely love it. All right, so we're in February. Obviously, we're at the lower time for what we do, about to ramp up as we get to draft and stuff. But what do you have coming up? You said you have projections coming out. What can we expect from you in the past month or so? Let's say pre-NFL draft. What do you have on the calendar?
Yeah, next week I have updating all of my dynasty rankings to reflect the 2022 projections. And then we will start ramping up. This is something we just started doing 2 years ago, but NFL draft prospect profiles. Dave Richard does a lot of those. Dan Schneier does a lot of those. Chris Towers will do some. I will do a few. And we'll just I tell people I watch more college football in February and March than I do in the college football season, because if I watched football on Saturday during the season, I wouldn't have a wife. So we'll get the prospect profiles all ramped up. We'll probably do a few more mock drafts as well, but there won't be as much content in the next month from me as there generally is. This is the time of year when I try to be a good dad and a good husband.
I love it. I love it. Always good to get the downtime. So Heath, listen, this has been an absolute blast. Everyone knows where to find you, but go ahead and let them know where they can check you out.
Yeah, on Twitter, it's at Heath Cummings, SR, Heath Cummings Sr. And if you want to find our Dynasty content, just go to CBS Sports, go to the fantasy page. On the top right corner, you'll see Dynasty landing page, and basically anything we do Dynasty related will be on that page.
Love it. Love it. Make sure to check that out. Sir, thank you so much. High expectations come in. You absolutely exceeded them. I truly, truly do appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us. And I'm going to have our friend Man Bun, Gabe, take us out with some songs.
Get down. Turn on the pod, cause we looking alive right now. Peeling it back, take a quick look inside of all of these analysts. Daddy gon' handle this. Know he's a baddie. I know he ain't bad at this. We gon' lay back, talking talking irrelevance. Why do all that? Just for the hell of it. Hanging with Daddy. What's the vibe though? Late night vibes. Hanging with Daddy. What's up, Mike? Turn it on right now.